The commander of the Special Operations Unit raised his binoculars and scanned the tree-line, his gaze narrowing as it settled on the figure lying prone in the shadows, a woman. Calm and still, her rifle steady, as if it were a natural extension of her body, he muttered under his breath with a trace of disbelief. One woman against a dozen armed militants. This will not take long. In his mind, the outcome was already written. 5 minutes later, the forest floor was quiet, the air carrying only the faint scent of gunpowder. 12 bodies lay scattered among the undergrowth. The commander was still frozen behind his optics, struggling to understand what he had just witnessed. And there she was, lowering her weapon with the same controlled calm she had carried before the first shot. Her name was Sophia Phantom Cross, 28 years old, dark brown hair often tied into a tight braid to keep it clear of her sights, eyes of deep hazel that seemed capable of piercing the densest forest canopy. Her vision could find movement at distances beyond 1,500 meters, even when the world in between was nothing but tangled branches and shifting shadows. For 3 years, she had served as a designated marksman for elite units, but to most commanders, she was still regarded as the female sniper assigned from above, a capable shooter perhaps, but one who did not truly belong on the front line. Her upbringing was unlike any other in the military. Sophia was raised in the wilds of Alaska by her father, Michael Cross, a man who had been both a master hunter and a decorated Army Ranger. She learned to track animals and handle firearms before she could even read fluently. The winters of her childhood were spent not in classrooms, but in survival, braving blizzards, ice, and the deep silence of a land where mistakes could cost her life. Michael Cross had been one of the most respected snipers in Army history, surviving 3 tours in Iraq and Afghanistan with 89 confirmed kills. His skill was not defined only by his aim, but by his deep understanding of ballistics, wind, terrain, and the mental resilience that separated true snipers from ordinary marksmen. When Sophia's mother passed in a tragic car accident, Michael retired from service and dedicated himself to raising his daughter far from civilization, determined to pass on skills that no school could teach. Their cabin sat 50 miles from the nearest neighbor, cut off from the world except by bush plane in summer or snowmobile in winter. Sophia's formal education arrived in envelopes, but her true schooling was in the wilderness. By 12, she could follow the faint trail of a wounded elk for miles through snow, noticing signs so subtle they were invisible to most hunters. By 14, she was taking clean shots at caribou from 800 meters with custom rifles her father had modified. By 16, she could live for weeks alone in the wild, leaving no tracks even the best trackers could follow. Michael taught her that true marksmanship was not about shooting when conditions were perfect. It was about hitting the target when everything was against you: heavy wind, poor angles, fatigue, cold so sharp it made your hands ache. A real sniper thrived when the odds were worst, and those lessons shaped Sophia into someone who did not measure herself by comfort or convenience, but by her ability to perform under pressure. Sophia's evenings were often spent in deep conversations with her father about ethics and responsibility. He reminded her that pulling the trigger was the simplest act. The true challenge was knowing when to do it, when to hold back, and how to live with both choices. He told her again and again that the rifle was just a tool. The mind behind it was the real weapon. When Sophia first stepped in the military world, it was as if she had walked into a place that was built on rules carved from stone. The air at the induction center carried a sharp scent of polish and machine oil, a reminder that here every detail was expected to be in order. Her files slid across desks with numbers that made evaluators pause. Wilderness studies and ballistics degree with highest honors. Physical fitness scores in the top percentile. Marksmanship results that shattered long-standing records. Yet even as her paperwork told one story, the eyes of many who looked at her told another. She came from Alaska, a land that shaped her in ways no city life could. Her stride carried the confidence of someone who had crossed frozen rivers without a bridge and tracked prey for days through white silence. In the field, she moved like she belonged there. But the barracks were a different kind of wilderness. Here the predators did not hide in trees. They stood in plain sight, dressed in uniform, measuring her with glances that asked if she could survive in their world. During basic training, the drill instructors learned quickly that the quiet young woman with braided hair was not a rookie when it came to handling a rifle. On the firing range, she moved through positions with smooth precision, her breathing steady, her trigger squeeze controlled, shots finding the bullseye again and again at distances that made others squint through their sights in frustration. Still, there were murmurs. Anyone could shoot well on a calm day. They said, combat is another matter. Sniper school became her proving ground, a place where the discipline her father had taught her in the snow and wind of Alaska now had a formal framework. Other trainees used wind meters and rangefinders to make calculations. Sophia's eyes read the movement of leaves, the curl of dust, the way heat shimmered on the horizon. Her corrections came as naturally as breathing, instructors noticed, writing notes about her instinctive adjustments, her ability to track moving targets with patience that seemed almost unnatural. Yet even here whispers followed her, wondering if patience could hold when bullets were flying both ways. It was not just her skill they doubted. It was her presence. In a community where every member had been molded by years of male-dominated culture, she was an outsider by default. The integration of women into combat roles was still a contested subject, and Sophia was living proof that the policy had real faces. Among those who doubted her the most was Commander John Steele, a man forged in the heat of 18 years of special operations. His face was weathered by sun, wind, and the grit of 100 missions. His philosophy was simple: strike hard, strike fast, and overwhelm the enemy before they can breathe. In his mind, combat was a test of aggression and physical dominance, qualities he believed were rooted in raw male strength. John would sometimes speak in a tone that carried an edge of condescension, acknowledging that Sophia could shoot, but questioning if she could keep her head when the world turned into chaos. He preferred operators who charged into danger shoulder to shoulder. His trust was reserved for those who had bled with him in the dirt, and he had already decided Sophia did not fit that mold. Sophia understood the weight of perception. She knew that arguing would only feed the image they had of her, so she kept her responses measured and her actions sharp. Every mission she was assigned she completed with quiet efficiency. Every task she approached with a focus that did not waver. She said little in meetings, but listened to every word, filing away details about tactics, preferences, and habits of those in command. In her free hours, she studied after-action reports from operations John had led. She traced the paths his teams took through enemy territory, noting where his reliance on direct assault worked and where it came dangerously close to failure. She saw patterns in his planning, an instinct for the straightforward path, a tendency to trust firepower over subtlety, and she knew that in the wrong situation, those patterns could be turned against him. Her assignments in those early months rarely placed her in the heart of the action. She was often positioned on ridgelines far from the team, given overwatch duties where her shots were few, where her role was to prevent escape rather than engage in the primary fight. It was work she did well, but also kept her from showing what she could do under real pressure, and in a world where every moment was judged. Absence from the most dangerous moments meant absence from respect. There were moments when her frustration threatened to surface, times when she would return from a mission knowing she had seen solutions no one asked for, knowing her insight could have saved time, risk, or lives, but she held it in. Discipline was not just about holding a rifle steady. It was about holding herself steady until the right moment came. She noticed the way some of the male operators moved around her, polite on the surface, professional in tone, but always with a slight distance, as if she carried an invisible line they would not cross. It was not hostility so much as exclusion, a quiet reinforcement that she was part of the unit, but not truly in it. They would trade jokes and stories with each other in the barracks, but the flow would shift when she entered. Sophia did not need their friendship, but she knew she needed their trust, and trust was built in moments where skill met necessity. She could train endlessly, she could shoot perfectly, but until the day came when her skill was the deciding factor between life and death, the doubts would remain. The truth about military culture in elite units was that it moved slowly. Beliefs were not changed by memos. They were changed by events. Sophia carried that truth like a quiet vow. She would wait, she would watch, and when the moment came, she would be ready. One evening after a long day of training, she sat alone at the edge of the base perimeter, the sun slipping behind the hills, the air cooling into the crisp bite of night. In the distance, she could hear the muffled shouts from a training field where another unit was drilling. She thought about the years in Alaska, about her father's words echoing in the cold air, that anyone could shoot when the conditions were perfect. But the real test was when everything went wrong. She believed without question that her test would come, and she believed equally that when it did, she would not just pass it, she would change the way they looked at her forever. The mission came wrapped in the kind of secrecy that made the air in the briefing room feel heavier. The walls seemed to pull the sound in and hold it there. The overhead lights hummed softly, throwing a pale glow over the table where the maps and satellite images were spread. This was Operation Silent Thunder, a name chosen not for drama, but because silence was the only way it could work and thunder was what it would unleash if it failed. The target was high value, a man whose hands had shaped multiple attacks against coalition forces. His name was spoken only once in the room, and then locked away. He was expected to meet with his key lieutenants in a compound deep in the forests of eastern Afghanistan. The location was isolated, the terrain thick with pine and cedar, and the canopy so dense that even the latest satellites could only catch glimpses of what lay beneath. Sophia sat at the far side of the table, the map's topography lines spreading before her like a puzzle waiting to be solved. The others leaned forward to listen to John Steele, his voice steady as he walked them through the plan. The satellite images showed the compound as a cluster of squat buildings ringed with guard positions. The report estimated 20 armed men for security. But in the margins, Sophia saw more than the pictures revealed. Her eyes followed the faint discolorations in the forest imagery. Unnatural lines where vegetation seemed too evenly disturbed, patches where the canopy's density shifted in a way that spoke of human work, small trails threading through terrain that should have been untouched. They were not on the official diagram. But to her, they stood out like footprints in fresh snow. She could almost feel the presence of hidden fighters. The intelligence team emphasized the timing. The meeting would be short, the target would arrive and leave in a narrow window. Speed would be critical. John's plan reflected his style, direct, fast, and forceful. His 8-man SEAL team would approach the compound head-on, engage, and neutralize the leadership before they could react. For Sophia, the assignment was clear but limiting. She was to take an overwatch position more than 800 meters from the target. She would cover the northern escape routes and prevent anyone from slipping away. On paper, it sounded like a role of importance. In reality, it kept her well out of the fight unless the enemy ran. As John pointed at her assigned position on the map, she studied the elevation lines and sight angles. It was a solid choice for surveillance, but it left blind spots that would matter if things went bad. She traced her finger to a ridge line further west, higher ground with overlapping lanes of fire that could reach both the compound and the likely reinforcement trails. From there, she could watch the whole approach, spot flanking moves before they closed in, and protect the team. Far more effectively, she suggested the change, keeping her voice even, pointing to the terrain features that supported her reasoning. But John's face tightened. His words clipped. He had been leading operations before she had ever held a military rifle. The position had been chosen. The orders would be followed. This was not a time for improvisation. Sophia nodded, the gesture calm and without argument. But inside, she was already turning the map over in her mind, storing every line, every contour, every shadow. She had learned long ago that the map in your head could save your life when the one in your hand was gone. The team prepared through the day, cleaning weapons, checking gear, running final comms tests. The low hum of readiness filled the air. As night approached, the forest around the forward staging area grew still. The sound of boots on dirt softened as the operators moved into final positions. The insertion was precise, the kind of movement that made elite teams what they were. The forest swallowed them as they advanced, their dark shapes weaving between trees, each step a piece of silent choreography. Sophia broke off toward her designated point, the rifle balanced against her shoulder, her senses stretching out into the dark. Reaching the overwatch spot, she settled in and unfolded the bipod, the earth beneath her cool and damp. Through her scope, the compound came into sharp focus. The low buildings cast shadows under the moonlight. The perimeter guards paced with a casual rhythm. Nothing in their movements suggested they knew what was coming. Yet as her scope drifted beyond the obvious, she began to notice the things that did not match the picture from the briefing. There were depressions in the ground just inside the tree-line, shapes that blended with the natural terrain, but were too regular to be random. At first glance, they looked like fallen branches or uneven soil, but to Sophia's eyes, they were fighting positions, dug with care, lined with foliage, their angles chosen to cover approach routes. She caught the faint glint of metal where no guard stood, a flash in the darkness that betrayed a hidden rifle barrel, an antenna disguised as a dead limb. The work of fighters who understood concealment as well as any special forces unit. The more she scanned, the more certain she became. The enemy force was larger than reported, their defenses deeper, their readiness sharper. This was not just a meeting under light guard. It was a fortress wrapped in a forest, and if John's team walked straight into it, they would not walk back out. She reported movement in the tree-line north of the compound, voices low and steady over the radio, her tone calm, carrying the weight of what she saw. John's reply came quick, telling her to maintain radio discipline. They saw no threats from their position. She was to hold her role. The forest around her felt thicker as she lowered the rifle for a moment, her mind already running ahead. She could see the pattern forming, enemy fighters moving into arcs that would overlap and trap the team, routes of retreat narrowing, lines of fire converging on the approach. It was a design meant to crush an assault before it could reach the walls. In that moment, Sophia knew that if the enemy sprung their trap, she would have one choice: follow orders and watch the team fall, or move into a position that would let her break the ambush before it closed. It was the kind of decision her father had prepared her for, the kind where no one could tell you which was right until after the dust settled. The minutes ticked down toward contact, her breathing slow, her finger resting against the trigger guard, her scope sliding between guard towers and tree leans. Every sense alive to the shifting shapes in the dark. Somewhere beyond the walls, the target was waiting, surrounded by men who thought they had the advantage, and somewhere in the approach, John Steele was leading his team straight into their jaws. The forest was holding its breath. Even the wind seemed to pause as John Steele's team moved into the open stretch between the last line of trees and the compound, their boots sinking lightly into the soft earth. Rifles raised, night vision casting the world in shades of green, they advanced in perfect formation, every step a product of years of training. From her position, Sophia's scope followed their movement, yet her eyes were drawn again and again to the darker shapes beyond their awareness. Enemy fighters shifting into place, their bodies pressed low to the ground, their weapons cradled, moving with the same quiet skill as predators closing on prey. She counted at least 12, maybe more, the number growing as her scope caught flickers of movement on both flanks. Her voice came steady over the radio, warning of fighters in the northern tree line, advising caution, but John's reply was short, telling her to hold her post and maintain discipline. He saw no threats. The plan was in motion. The trap closed in an instant. A flash of muzzle fire ripped through the darkness, followed by a wall of gunfire from multiple directions. The air shattered into a storm of sound. The smell of burning powder filled the clearing. Tracers streaked in arcs above and around the team. They dove for what little cover there was, returning fire, but the angles were against them. Through her scope, Sophia saw the enemy's formation, the arcs overlapping perfectly, escape routes collapsing, the compound's defenders joining the assault from the front, while concealed positions hammered them from both sides. The SEAL team was pinned, each second tightening the noose. Her orders were clear, but orders did not matter if no one was left to follow them. She slid her rifle onto her back, moving low, her body flowing through the undergrowth like shadow through water, years of stalking elk and caribou guiding her steps. Every movement calculated to avoid snapping a twig or disturbing a branch. The weight of her gear was nothing compared to the urgency in her chest. She knew exactly where she needed to be, a rocky rise to the west she had memorized from the maps. It offered commanding lines of fire on the entire kill zone. But reaching it meant crossing uneven ground scattered with loose stone and tangled roots. She moved as if the earth itself was on her side, pausing when an enemy's gaze might sweep her way, sliding forward in bursts when noise from the firefight covered her movement. Reaching the outcrop, she dropped into prone position, her breathing deep and even, the rifle settling against her shoulder, as if it belonged there. Through the scope she locked on to the man directing the ambush, the enemy commander, a figure crouched behind partial cover, shouting orders into a radio and signaling with sharp hand movements. His position was the mind of the trap, and cutting off the mind would weaken the body. The shot was far from simple. 547 meters, wind gusting unpredictably through the trees, the target moving in short bursts as he coordinated his fighters. Sophia adjusted her aim, factoring drift, elevation, and the brief windows when his body was fully exposed. Her father's voice seemed to whisper at her memory, reminding her that the hardest shots were the ones that mattered most. She exhaled halfway and held it, the trigger's resistance melting under her steady pressure. The rifle spoke in a sharp crack, the recoil gentle against her shoulder. Through the glass, she watched the commander fall backward, his radio clattering to the dirt. The effect was immediate. The enemy's rhythm faltered, their bursts of fire losing coordination, men glancing toward each other for guidance that was no longer coming. Sophia shifted her scope to the machine gunner pinning the left flank, his weapon spewing fire through a narrow gap in the canopy. She threaded a bullet through that same gap, the figure crumpling forward onto the gun. 2 down, the pressure on the SEAL team easing just enough for them to shift position. Sophia did not wait. Her scope found 2 fighters moving along a flank to close in on John's men from behind. She engaged them in rapid succession, adjusting her hold fractionally between shots, each one landing true. The battle was no longer a one-sided ambush. It was becoming a hunt, the hunted shifting roles under the guidance of an unseen predator. The enemy began to scatter, some retreating into the forest, others trying to regroup. Sophia tracked 2 attempting to flee, their bodies weaving through the brush, but her rounds found them all the same. The fight contracted toward the center, the remaining fighters huddling near each other for mutual defense. But that only made them easier targets. Sophia anticipated their movement, adjusting position just enough to open a line through the branches, each trigger pull an act of precision and patience. The SEAL team, realizing someone was tearing apart the ambush from afar, began pushing forward, their fire growing bolder, their shouts sharper. By the time Sophia's 10th shot echoed through the trees, the fight was breaking. One sniper had been targeting John's medic, his muzzle flash betraying him for an instant. Sophia's reply cut through the foliage and dropped him before he could fire again. The last fighter had gone to ground behind a massive fallen log. His cover nearly perfect. From most angles, he was untouchable, but Sophia had already moved into the one position that gave her a 6-inch window between 2 trunks. She breathed, adjusted, and sent the final round, the forest settling in his silence as his body went still. 5 minutes had passed since the first shot of the ambush. 12 hostile fighters lay dead, and John Steele's entire team stood alive. Sophia stayed in her scope for a moment longer, sweeping the treeline for movement, but there was nothing. The fight was over. John's voice came over the radio, changed from the tone he had used before, no condescension, only urgency and awe. Asking where those shots had come from, she replied calmly that the threat was neutralized and the area secure, advising them to prepare to continue the mission. As the SEAL team regrouped and began moving toward the compound, Sophia broke down her position, her body moving with the same controlled economy as before the fight. She felt no rush of triumph, only the steady readiness to act again if the forest demanded it. The only difference now was that somewhere behind her John Steele had seen the truth for himself. The forest seemed calmer now, the air lighter without the weight of danger pressing down. The acrid scent of gunpowder still clung to the wind, drifting in faint wisps between the trees. Sophia moved with steady purpose, her boots brushing softly through the leaves. She rejoined the path that John Steele's team had carved through the terrain, her eyes scanning for any sign of movement. But there was none. The enemy was gone. The SEAL operators were regrouping, their voices low, every man glancing toward the direction from which the precision fire had come. They had not seen her during the fight, but they knew exactly who it was. John gave quick hand signals, rallying them into a tight formation before resuming the advance toward the compound. His usual command tone softened, carrying an edge of thoughtfulness rather than sheer urgency. Sophia took a parallel route, moving at distance, her Overwatch role now shifting into a silent guardian as the team breached the outer perimeter of the compound. The buildings were as described in the intelligence package, but now undefended, the element of surprise gone, the defenders eliminated before they could even call for reinforcements. The primary objective was achieved with clinical speed. The high-value target and his close advisors were located in one of the inner rooms. Their meeting cut short by the arrival of armed shadows at the door. The engagement was swift, the threat neutralized, no alarms raised beyond those that had already fallen silent in the forest. When extraction time came, the helicopter descended through the early light of dawn, its blades chopping the air into a steady roar. The team loaded quickly, the cabin filling with the smell of sweat, dirt, and faint oil from the weapons now slung across their chests. Sophia entered last, taking a seat near the rear, her rifle resting across her knees, her eyes steady. John sat across from her, his gaze fixed not on the floor or the mission report in his hand, but directly on her. There was no trace of the dismissive look he had worn in the past, no guarded skepticism, only the weight of something harder to define, respect earned through undeniable action. He leaned forward slightly, his voice cutting through the engine noise, telling her that what she had done out there was beyond anything he had seen, that she had saved every man in his command. His words were measured but carried a kind of raw honesty that could not be faked. He spoke not as a commander giving feedback, but as a soldier acknowledging another soldier. Sophia's reply was as steady as her shots had been. She told him she had done her job. Nothing more, her tone without pride or false modesty. Just fact, but in the silence that followed, both of them understood that what she had done went far beyond duty. Back at base, the debriefs began, the mission recorded in meticulous detail. The after-action report from Operation Silent Thunder was sealed under classification, but within the closed circles of special operations it became a case study. Instructors dissected the sequence of shots, the tactical repositioning, the speed with which she had dismantled a well-coordinated ambush. Analysts noted that it was a rare blend of instinct, discipline, and precision that made such an outcome possible. 6 months later, Sophia's promotion came through, not just a new rank on her shoulder, but new doors opening, invitations to join elite sniper units where the best of the best trained and operated. No longer was she kept on the perimeter of the fight. Now she was sought for the center of it. And John Steele, the man who had once questioned her place, became one of her most vocal supporters. In briefings with other commanders, he would tell them plainly, if you want to see what a sniper can really do, watch Sophia Crosswork. She does not just hit targets. She shapes the battlefield with every decision she makes. Years passed, operations came and went, and the bond between them shifted from initial mistrust to something built on hard-earned trust. They had saved each other in different ways, Sophia proving her worth in combat, John ensuring her abilities were recognized in the places that mattered. Together they became an example to others in the field, proof that skill and courage had no gender. When John earned promotion to admiral and assumed command of the Naval Special Warfare Group, his first personnel request was for Sophia to join him as senior sniper instructor. The role was more than a title. It was a chance to shape the next generation of marksmen and women, to pass on techniques forged in the wilds of Alaska and sharpened in the crucible of combat. At the training facility, she built her program from the ground up, blending old-world fieldcraft with the latest technology. Her students learned to read terrain the way others read a map, to calculate wind, not just with devices, but with their senses, to understand that the trigger was the last step in a long chain of decisions. She taught patience, stealth, and the art of thinking like the enemy, while keeping the discipline to act only when the moment was right. In her presence, the young operators could see the balance of calm and precision that defined a true sniper. Some of them came in with doubts, much like the one she had faced, but those doubts did not last long. She did not need to convince them with words. Her skill and presence spoke louder than any argument. Sophia's story traveled quietly through the ranks, told in training yards and over late-night meals in the mess. It was not the number of enemies she had eliminated in those 5 minutes that people repeated most. It was the fact that she had eliminated every assumption about what could be expected of her. that she had changed minds without demanding to. In the end, her greatest victory was not recorded in the official mission logs. It was written in the shift of perspective that happened in those who served alongside her. The ones who once doubted now knew without question that capability could not be measured by preconception, but the battlefield cared nothing for bias, only for results. On certain evenings, she would find herself standing alone at the edge of the range after her students had gone, the light fading into the horizon, the air cool, her rifle cradled lightly in her hands. She would think back to that forest in Afghanistan, to the weight of the scope against her cheek, to the stillness between breaths before each shot, and she would feel a quiet satisfaction, not for the recognition, but for the fact that when a moment had come, she had been ready. For those who had doubted her, the proof was eternal. For those who believed from the start, the pride was shared. And for Sophia herself, the lesson was clear. True respect was not given. It was earned one shot at a time.